It was a typical day at a local shooting range, filled with familiar faces and the sound of targets being hit. But in the corner, unnoticed by most, was a quiet woman standing by herself. Dressed casually, she didn't look like someone who belonged among the seasoned champions and skilled marksmen. As the others laughed and joked, no one paid much attention to her. She seemed like just another beginner, ready to face the usual hurdles at the range. But as she took a deep breath and aimed at the target, something changed. The room fell silent. Her first shot shattered the record. The crowd went from whispering to stunned silence. How could a woman, so unassuming and seemingly inexperienced, break the champion's record with a single shot? It wasn't supposed to happen. The regulars, who'd been eyeing her with doubt, now watched in disbelief as she calmly lined up her next shot. Was it a fluke? Or was there something more to this unremarkable woman than anyone realized? The tension built as all eyes were on her, waiting for the next move. Was she just lucky, or was she destined to shake up the shooting world? Stay tuned, because what happens next is about to turn everything upside down. The woman's name was Emma. No one knew much about her, other than she showed up at the range every now and then, keeping to herself. She wasn't a regular like the rest of them, people who spent hours honing their craft, swapping tips, and boasting about their latest achievements. Emma had never stood out, until now. For some reason, no one had ever taken the time to ask about her story. The champion Mark was known across the region for his skill and precision. He had been at the top for years, his name a fixture on every leaderboard. Everyone at the range knew him. He was the type to brag about his latest victories and challenge anyone who seemed remotely confident in their own abilities. But there was something about Emma's quiet presence that seemed to unnerve him. He had noticed her when she first walked in, but dismissed her as just another beginner. Yet, that one shot, it was impossible. It shouldn't have happened. As Emma prepared to take her second shot, Mark couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. What if this wasn't a fluke? What if this woman, with no flashy gear or experience, was actually better than him? His ego, usually unshakable, suddenly felt fragile. He watched her carefully, but she wasn't looking at him. She wasn't even looking at the crowd. Her focus was entirely on the target. It was like she knew something no one else did. Emma adjusted her stance and took a slow, steady breath. She wasn't worried about impressing anyone. She wasn't even worried about breaking a record. The only thing on her mind was the target in front of her. It had been years since she'd held a gun in her hands, but something about this moment felt different. The tension in the air, the eyes of everyone in the room on her, only seemed to heighten her focus. It wasn't about competition. It was about precision. Mark stood behind her, his arms crossed, trying to suppress the growing unease that he couldn't quite explain. His mind raced with doubts, but he couldn't bring himself to confront them. Instead, he clung to the familiar belief that no one could challenge his title. Not even a woman who looked like she'd never picked up a firearm before. But then the shot rang out, slicing through the silence. It was perfect. The crowd, which had been holding its breath, let out an audible gasp. The target's center was now completely obliterated, a mark no one had ever made before. The champion's record, his pride, was broken with startling ease. Emma didn't look up. She didn't smile. Her expression remained calm, almost serene. That was the most unsettling part for Mark. Was this skill simply the result of natural talent, or was there something more? She wasn't acting like someone who had just made history. And then it hit him. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know anything about her, and that more than anything made him feel vulnerable. There was a quiet mystery surrounding Emma that Mark couldn't shake. She wasn't part of the usual shooting scene. There were no backstories or gossip about her to fill in the gaps. She was an enigma, and that made her dangerous. As Emma lined up for her next shot, the murmurs from the crowd grew louder. Mark's mind spiraled. What if this wasn't just a fluke? What if she was here to take his spot? The thought was more than he could bear. This was his world, his title, and he wasn't about to lose it to someone who didn't even belong. But deep down, Something told him he might be underestimating her in a way he would soon regret. Emma took another slow breath, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the target ahead. The noise in the room seemed to fade, the chatter and whispers becoming distant. She could feel the weight of the eyes on her back, the pressure mounting with every passing second. It wasn't just about hitting the target now. It was about proving something. To them, to herself. Mark's fingers twitched at his sides, his usual confidence wavering. He had always thrived on being the best, the one everyone looked up to, the one people came to for advice. But now he wasn't sure what to think. Emma's calmness unnerved him, almost as if she didn't care about the attention, the stakes, or even the competition. She was so composed, like she knew something he didn't. The crowd was on edge too. The regulars who had laughed at her when she first walked in were now standing in a tight cluster, their eyes glued to her every move. There was a murmur of disbelief as the seconds ticked by, the tension hanging thick in the air. Everyone knew the next shot could change everything. Mark had already lost his record. What would happen if she did it again? Emma lifted the gun and steadied her grip. She wasn't nervous, though it felt like the world was holding its breath around her. There was no doubt in her mind about what she had to do. But as her finger hovered over the trigger, her mind flashed back to the last time she had stood in a shooting range, years ago, under much darker circumstances. The memories were buried deep, but the feeling of being watched, of being judged, it was all too familiar. She shook it off. This was her moment. She focused on the target, narrowed her world down to that single spot, and then, with precision, squeezed the trigger. Mark couldn't look away. His heart raced as the shot rang out, louder than ever. The crowd gasped in unison. Was it another perfect hit? Or had she missed? The silence that followed felt suffocating. No one dared move. Everyone waited for the verdict. Would Emma, this mysterious woman, shatter everything Mark had worked for? Or was she just another flash in the pan, doomed to fade away once the dust settled? All eyes were locked on the target, but the most important question was still unspoken. What would happen next? The silence stretched on, unbearable. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the target, but the results weren't immediately clear. Emma didn't move. She stood there, her posture unchanged, her expression unreadable. Mark's heart raced in his chest, and for the first time in a long time, he questioned his own abilities. Was she really better than him? Was the record truly hers to claim? Then, as the range officer slowly walked toward the target to assess the shot, something strange happened. Mark's gaze flicked nervously toward the group of regulars who had gathered around Emma earlier. They were now muttering among themselves, casting glances at each other with puzzled expressions. One of them, a man named Danny, who was known for being well-connected in shooting circles, stepped forward with an unusual look of hesitation on his face. Mark's confusion deepened. Why was Danny, usually so confident, acting this way? As the officer finally reached the target and began examining it, an even greater shock rippled through the crowd. The shot had hit dead center, just like the last one. But what caught everyone off guard wasn't just the precision. It was the way the bullet had split the center of the previous shot, creating a perfect overlap. It was as if Emma had planned it all along. Danny's voice broke the silence, his words heavy with something between disbelief and fear. This isn't just a record, it's a message. Mark furrowed his brow, his mind spinning. A message? What did that even mean? He turned his gaze back to Emma, who stood still, her expression unreadable, her calm demeanor like an enigma. The regulars around her were whispering now, their faces pale. They clearly knew something Mark didn't. For a moment, Emma's eyes met his. There was no smugness in her gaze, no hint of triumph, only an unsettling calm. The room felt colder. Danny took another step forward, his voice low. "You don't know who she really is, do you?" Mark's pulse quickened, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. What was going on? Who was Emma really? What had she just done? The officer came back, holding up the target with the now unmistakable marks. 2 perfect shots, stacked on top of each other, as though they were one. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Mark's heart sank. Emma wasn't just breaking records, she was rewriting the rules. And with every passing second, the tension in the room grew, as if something much bigger was unfolding. The air was thick with anticipation as Mark stood frozen, his mind reeling from everything that had just happened. He looked at Emma again, trying to read something, anything, in her eyes. But there was nothing there but that same calm, impenetrable expression. She wasn't just a woman who had beaten his record. She wasn't just a fluke. She was something else entirely. Danny stepped forward again, his face pale. She's not just a champion shooter, Mark. She's trained for something much more. Mark blinked, trying to process the words. Trained for what? What are you talking about? Danny took a deep breath, his gaze flickering nervously to Emma, who hadn't moved an inch. She's ex-military, special forces. You see, she's been off the radar for years. No one knows where she's been, or what she's been doing. But we've all heard the stories. People like her don't just break records, they leave a trail of destruction behind them. Mark's stomach dropped. He had thought Emma was just another beginner, someone who'd stumbled upon a talent for shooting. But now the truth began to sink in. She wasn't just here for a casual visit. She wasn't just here to compete. She was here for something bigger. Emma finally spoke, her voice steady but filled with purpose. I came here to test something myself, and to make a point. Her eyes locked with Mark's. You've been at the top for a long time, but there are others who've been waiting in the shadows. People who are better than you, people who don't care about titles. I'm one of them. Mark's throat went dry. The realization hit him hard. Emma wasn't interested in his title, in the accolades or the glory. She was here to remind everyone that the game was changing, that the rules were different now. For a brief moment, Mark felt something in his chest crack. His sense of invincibility, his unshakable confidence, shattered. He had been so sure of his position, so sure that no one could dethrone him. But Emma had done it effortlessly, without even trying to prove a point. She wasn't just challenging him for the title, she was challenging everything he stood for. But just as Mark opened his mouth to speak, something else happened. The door to the range swung open, and in walked another figure. One Mark recognized immediately. It was Jack, a former rival and someone Mark had never beaten in a serious competition. Jack's expression was unreadable, but he was holding something in his hands. He walked directly toward Emma, his eyes never leaving her face. He stood beside her for a moment, then held out a small envelope. Emma took it without a word, opened it, and read the contents. Her face didn't change, but Mark could see the faintest hint of a smile. Well, Mark, Jack said, his voice low, looks like the real game is about to begin. And just like that, the tension that had built over the past few minutes evaporated. Mark, for the first time in his life, wasn't sure where he stood. What had he just stepped into? Who were these people, and what were they planning? The answer, Mark soon realized, wasn't just about breaking records. It was about the beginning of something much bigger, something he wasn't ready for. Emma wasn't just here to compete. She was here to change everything. And as the realization hit him, the only thing Mark could do was stand back and watch as the next chapter unfolded. As the final words hung in the air, the room fell into an uneasy silence. Mark watched as Emma, Jack, and the others exchanged quiet words, a shared understanding passing between them. For Mark, it was like stepping out of one world and into another, a world where his old victories meant nothing, where titles and records were just fleeting markers of a much deeper game. He stood there, caught between disbelief and reluctant admiration. Emma had come in as a mystery, shattering not only his record, but his entire sense of what he thought he knew about the world of competitive shooting. The more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't just about skill or precision. It was about something far more elusive. Emma wasn't just breaking records. She was exposing the fragility of the system Mark had so carefully built his life around. As he turned to leave, the sound of Emma's steady footsteps echoed behind him. For a moment, their eyes met again. There was no hostility in her gaze, no animosity. Just quiet resolve. She wasn't his enemy. She was a reminder that sometimes the world moves forward, whether you're ready for it or not. And with that, Mark walked out of the range, knowing that everything had changed, and that it would never be the same again.